night of August 6, 1585. On the banks of the Irtysh River, in the heart of Siberia, 53 men sleep around dying campfires. They are exhausted, starving, thousands of miles from home. One of them is Yermak Timofeyevich, 50 years old, face marked by scars from a lifetime of violence, former bandit, former river pirate, now conqueror of a territory larger than all of Western Europe. But on this night, Yermak makes a fatal mistake. He removes his armor, a steel armor gifted by Tsar Ivan. Puts on his armor as he runs, manages to board, but an arrow strikes him in the back. He staggers, the boat rocks, and then Yermak falls. 20 kilograms of steel pull him down. The Irtysh River swallows Russia's greatest conqueror. His body will never be found. But his legend? His legend is just beginning. This is the true story of Yermak Timofeyevich, the criminal who became a hero, the bandit who conquered Siberia, and the man whose death remains one of the greatest mysteries in Russian history. For the next 27 minutes, you'll discover who he really was, how an outlaw managed to defeat an Islamic empire, and why, even 400 years later, Russians still debate whether he was hero or villain. Get ready, because this story has far more blood than the school textbooks told you. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, leave a like on this video. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing fascinating stories like this one. And if you like history told differently, with facts you won't find just anywhere, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. I post videos like this every week. All right? Now let's go back in time. Long before that dramatic death in the Irtysh River. Back to when Yermak was just a bandit with a price on his head. 1570s, Volga River. Nobody knows exactly when Yermak was born. Estimates range between 1532 and 1542. Nobody knows where he came from. Some say he was the son of a salt hauler in the Urals. Others claim he was descended from Don Cossacks. What we know for certain is this. Around 1570, Yermak Timofeyevich led one of the most feared gangs on the Volga River. River pirates who attacked merchant convoys, plundered villages, and disappeared into the muddy waters before authorities could react. Yermak was brutal, efficient, and wanted. Tsar Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, had placed a price on Yermak's head. Anyone who captured him alive would receive lands and a noble title. But nobody could capture him. Yermak knew every bend of the Volga, every hiding place. He had absolute loyalty from his men, something rare among Cossacks. He divided plunder equally, never abandoned the wounded, and led from the front in every battle. For a criminal, he had a code of honor. But in 1579, everything changed. Russia was bleeding. Ivan the Terrible had plunged the country into the devastating Livonian War against Poland, Lithuania, and Sweden. 25 years of conflict that were draining the state's coffers. And at the same time, on the eastern frontiers, something threatened Russian expansion: the Siberia Khanate. The Siberia Khanate was a Muslim state founded in 1468 by Kipchak Turks fleeing the civil wars of the Golden Horde. Its capital, Koshlik, sat on the banks of the Irtysh River, well beyond the Ural Mountains. For decades, Siberia's rulers had maintained pragmatic relations with Moscow. They paid tribute in sable furs, acknowledged themselves vassals of the Tsar, kept the peace. But in 1573, a new Khan took power. Kuchum. Direct descendant of Genghis Khan, Kuchum was an ambitious and proud ruler. As soon as he consolidated his power, he did three things. First, he had the previous Khan, Yedegar, executed along with his entire family. Second, he declared Islam the official religion of the Khanate, building mosques and inviting scholars from Bukhara. Third, and most importantly, he refused to continue paying tribute to Moscow. In practice, this was a declaration of independence. Ivan the Terrible was furious, but he could do nothing. His armies were occupied in the west. He had no resources for a punitive expedition beyond the Urals. So he delegated. He handed responsibility to the Stroganov family. The Stroganovs were billionaire merchants, not officially nobles, but infinitely wealthier than most Russian boyars. They had made their fortune in the salt and fur trade and owned immense territories on Russia's eastern frontiers. In 1574, Ivan granted the Stroganovs an imperial charter, permission to recruit private soldiers, build forts beyond the Urals, conquer lands in the Tsar's name, and keep the profits. It was privatized colonialism. The Stroganov family would finance the conquest. In return, they would keep the invaluable sable furs that would come from subjugated Siberia. But there was a problem. The Stroganovs had no army of their own. They needed experienced warriors, men capable of surviving in the brutal, unknown that lay beyond the Urals. So they did something unusual. They hired criminals. 1581, early summer. A Stroganov messenger finds Yermak hiding somewhere along the Volga. The offer is simple: lead a military expedition to Siberia, defeat Khan Kuchum, conquer the Sibir Khanate in Russia's name. In return, total pardon for all crimes, wealth, lands, and possibly even a noble title. Yermak was 50 years old by the standards of the time. He knew his life as a bandit had an expiration date. Eventually, he would be captured, hanged, and forgotten. Or he could risk everything, cross the Urals, conquer an entire kingdom, and maybe, just maybe, die as a hero instead of as a criminal. He accepted. September 1581. 1,636 men embark in 80 barges on the Chusovaya River, a tributary of the Kama, in the depths of Stroganov territories. The expedition is composed mainly of Cossacks, warriors from the lawless steppes between Russia and Poland. Men who recognize no authority beyond their own elected leaders. Soldiers by convenience, bandits by vocation, but there are also Russian volunteers, peasants seeking fortune, criminals fleeing justice, adventurers attracted by promises of wealth. The equipment is superior to anything any Siberian army possesses: 300 firearms, heavy muskets, arquebuses, small cannons, metal armor, sabers, spears, axes, and ammunition. Lots of ammunition. Yermak knows he's heading into the, absolute unknown. Maps are non-existent. Guides are scarce. Nobody in the expedition has ever been where they're going. But he also knows one crucial thing. The enemy has no gunpowder. The journey through the Urals is hellish. The rivers are beginning to freeze. The barges get stuck in ice. The men must disembark and drag them for kilometers across frozen land. The forest is dense, almost impenetrable. Siberian taiga where sunlight barely reaches the ground. Trees so close together it's impossible to see more than 10 meters ahead. And then there are the attacks. Local tribes watch the expedition with growing suspicion. Vogels and Ostyaks, Uralic peoples who don't want these armed foreigners on their lands. Arrows fly from the trees. Ambushes happen at night. Men disappear. Yermak responds with calculated brutality. Villages that attack his expedition are burned. Prisoners are publicly executed as warning. It's a war of mutual terror, but gunpowder makes the difference. When muskets thunder in the forest, native archers retreat. When small cannons explode, resistance disintegrates. In October 1581, after weeks of fighting, the expedition finally emerges on the other side of the Urals. They are officially in Siberia, and Khan Kuchum knows they're coming. Khan Kuchum is not an idiot. He rules a vast but sparsely populated territory. Perhaps 40,000 people total, scattered across hundreds of kilometers along the Irtysh and Tobol rivers. His standing army is small. Perhaps 2,000 professional warriors, most mounted, armed with composite bows and curved sabers. But he has allies. He summons his vassals: Tartar, Siberian and Vogel tribes who owe allegiance to the Khan. Within a few weeks, he manages to gather about 10,000 warriors, a massive numerical advantage over the invaders. Kuchum's plan is simple. Let Yermak penetrate deep into Siberian territory, stretch his supply lines, and then crush the invaders with numerical superiority on familiar terrain. It's a strategy that has worked against countless invaders over the centuries, but Kuchum has never faced gunpowder before. October 26, 1582. Chuvash Cape, on the Irtysh River. Yermak knows he's walking into a trap. His scouts have reported massive troop movements. Kuchum's army is positioning itself. But there's no turning back. Retreating through the Urals at this time of year would be suicide. Winter is coming. The barges couldn't make the return journey. The only option is to advance. In the early morning of October 26th, the Russian expedition faces Kuchum's army. 10,000 mounted warriors, experienced archers, heavy cavalry wearing leather armor and chainmail, Islamic banners fluttering in the icy wind. Against 1,600 exhausted Cossacks, Kuchum is confident. His shamans guaranteed victory. His commanders promise total annihilation of the invaders. He orders the attack. The Battle of Chuvash Cape lasts 3 days, not because the forces are balanced, but because Kuchum can't believe what's happening. On the first day, his cavalry attacks in waves, thousands of horsemen charging with raised sabers, shouting in Tartar and Turkic. Yermak forms his troops in a compact defensive formation, places the shooters in front, orders them to wait. When the horsemen are 50 meters away, he shouts the order. Fire. 300 muskets discharge simultaneously. The sound is deafening, like thunder breaking mountains. Dense smoke covers the battlefield. When the smoke clears, 200 horsemen are dead or wounded. Panicked horses run in all directions. The attack formation is shattered. Second wave, third wave, fourth, same result. Muskets roar, men fall. Kuchum's cavalry can't even get close enough to use their sabers. By the end of the first day, Kuchum loses over 1,000 men. Yermak loses 17. On the second day, Kuchum changes tactics. He orders his archers to attack at distance. Thousands of arrows fly toward Russian positions. Some Cossacks fall, but most are protected by metal armor that the arrows can't penetrate. Meanwhile, the muskets continue reaping lives. On the third day, Kuchum's army's morale collapses. Warriors flee. Allied tribes abandon the battlefield. Commanders beg Kuchum to retreat. Khan Kuchum, proud descendant of Genghis Khan, does something his Mongol ancestors never did. He flees, abandons his capital, abandons his treasures, abandons his kingdom, and disappears into the southern steppes. November 1st, 1582. Yermak enters Koshlik, the capital of the Siberia Khanate. The city is empty. Kuchum ordered total evacuation. Only a few elderly and sick remained. But the treasure is there. Sable furs piled in warehouses, gold, silver, silks imported from Bukhara, wealth accumulated from decades of trade along the Silk Road. Yermak orders everything loaded onto the boats. And then he does something interesting. Instead of declaring himself ruler, he sends messengers back to Moscow, loaded with gifts for Tsar Ivan, rare furs, captured documents, and a message. Siberia now belongs to Russia. When the messengers arrive in Moscow in February 1583, Ivan the Terrible can't believe it. A band of criminal Cossacks conquered an entire kingdom, defeated an army 10 times larger, annexed a territory the size of Western Europe. Ivan is ecstatic. He formally pardons Yermak of all crimes, sends him magnificent gifts, 2 complete suits of Milanese steel armor, a gold-studded chainmail, a sable fur cloak, and 500 reinforcement soldiers. Yermak is declared a hero of Russia, but the story is far from over, because Khan Kuchum hasn't given up. This story only gets more intense from here. If you're following along and want more people to know this incredible saga, share this video. Send it to that friend who's fascinated by historical conquests. And leave in the comments, would you have done what Yermak did? Risked everything for a chance at redemption? I want to know your opinion. Continuing. 1583-1585. The final years. The conquest was complete on paper, but on the ground the situation was chaotic. Khan Kuchum, though defeated, was not dead. He took refuge in the southern steppes with a loyal remnant of warriors. From there, he launched a relentless guerrilla war against the Russian occupiers. Constant ambushes, caravans attacked, isolated forts destroyed. And there was another problem. The reinforcements Ivan sent weren't enough. 500 soldiers arrived, but more than 300 Cossacks from the original expedition had died in the initial combats. Yermak now had about 1,800 men to control an immense territory. It was impossible. He consolidated his presence in Koshlik and some forts along the Irtysh, but large areas of Siberia remained outside Russian control. Local tribes oscillated between submission and rebellion, and then came the winter of 1584. Siberian winter. If you've never experienced it, you can't imagine. Temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero. The sun barely appears. Darkness reigns 18 hours a day. The rivers freeze completely. Provisions run out. Hunting becomes impossible. Yermak's men begin to die, not in battle, but from hunger, from cold, from disease. Scurvy devastates the garrison. Without fresh fruit, without vegetables, the Cossacks rot from the inside. Teeth fall out. Wounds don't heal. Men die delirious. Russian sources estimate that more than 500 men died that winter, almost a third of Yermak's force. When spring 1585 finally arrives, Yermak knows he can't endure another winter. Either he receives massive reinforcements from Moscow, or he must abandon Siberia. Summer, 1585, July. Caravans from Bukhara approach Koshlik bringing vital supplies, food, textiles, weapons. Yermak is euphoric. If he can establish regular trade with Central Asia, he can sustain the Russian occupation indefinitely. But there's a problem. The caravan is late. Yermak sends patrols to investigate. They return with terrible news. Khan Kuchum attacked the caravan, massacred the merchants, stole everything, and is moving toward Koshlik. Yermak makes a quick decision, leaves a garrison defending the capital, and departs with a mobile force of 200 men to intercept Kuchum. It's early August. The heat is suffocating. The men are exhausted after days of forced march through the swamps along the Irtysh. On the night of August 5th, Yermak orders camp on the riverbank. His scouts report no enemy activity in the area. He believes he is safe. It's the last mistake he will make. We're approaching the most crucial moment of this story. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, this is the moment, because I make videos like this every week, diving into fascinating stories you won't find anywhere else. Now, let's see how this all ends. We return to that night of August 6th, 1585. 53 men sleeping around dying. Campfires. Yermak, exhausted, removes his heavy armor for the first time in days. Seeks a few hours of sleep without that suffocating weight. He doesn't know that Khan Kuchum is less than a kilometer away. The Khan has waited 3 years for this moment. Followed Yermak, studied his patterns, and now, finally, the conqueror is vulnerable. 400 Tartar warriors approach in absolute silence, barefoot, without noisy armor, like ghosts in the darkness. 3 in the morning, the attack begins. Screams pierce the night. Arrows fly. Sabers flash under the moon. The Cossacks wake in panic. Try to grab their weapons, but it's too late. They're being massacred where they sleep. Yermak wakes when one of his lieutenants falls dead beside him. He rolls, grabs his sword, puts on his armor as he runs. 20 kilograms of steel, gift from the Tsar, symbol of his status as hero of Russia. The battle is chaotic, dark, impossible to distinguish friend from foe. Yermak shouts orders, tries to organize resistance. But his men are being torn apart. He makes a survival decision, runs toward the boats anchored in the river. If he can board, he can escape downriver, regroup, get revenge later. 5 Cossacks follow him. They jump into one of the barges, begin to untie it. An arrow hisses in the dark, hits Yermak in the back, penetrates between the armor plates. He staggers. The boat rocks. Another Cossack is hit and falls. Yermak loses his balance. 20 kilograms of steel pull him down. He topples into the dark water of the Irtysh and disappears. What happened to Yermak's body? Nobody knows. Russian sources say that Tartar fishermen found the body weeks later, floating downriver, recognized the ornate armor, took the body to Khan Kuchum. The Khan, legend says, looked at the corpse of the man who had destroyed his kingdom and ordered it treated with military honors. After all, Yermak had been a worthy warrior, but nobody knows where the body was buried. Other versions say the body was never found, that Yermak is still at the bottom of the Irtysh wearing the Tsar's armor. And there's a third version, more fantastic. Some chroniclers claim Yermak didn't die in that river, that he managed to swim to shore, that he disappeared into the steppes, that he spent the rest of his days as an anonymous nomad. It's a lie, probably, but it's a beautiful lie. Did Khan Kuchum win? In the short term, yes. After Yermak's death, the Russians abandoned Koshlik, retreated to the Urals. It seemed the conquest had completely failed. But in the long term? In the long term, Kuchum lost everything, because Yermak proved that Siberia could be conquered. He opened the way, showed the route, defeated the Khan's invincible army. In 1598, 13 years after Yermak's death, a new Russian expedition returned to Siberia, this time with thousands of soldiers, with adequate supplies, with full state support. They reconquered Koshlik, hunted Khan Kuchum through the steppes, and killed him. The Sibir Khanate ceased to exist. But Yermak's story doesn't end with his death. It ends with his transformation into legend. Russian czars quickly realized Yermak's propaganda value. A criminal who redeemed himself through conquest? An outlaw who became a hero? Perfect. Chroniclers were hired to write epics about Yermak. Painters created heroic images of him leading impossible charges. The Orthodox Church practically canonized him. In the 19th century, when Russia was consolidating its Siberian empire, Yermak became a national symbol. Statues were erected. Cities bore his name. Children learned about him in schools. He was the pioneer, the trailblazer, the man who gave Russia an empire. The reality was more complex, of course. Yermak was a violent mercenary. He massacred native tribes, enslaved prisoners, conquered lands for money, not patriotism. But legends were never about truth. They're about what we want to believe. Today, more than 400 years after his death, Yermak remains controversial. In modern Russia, he's still seen as a hero by many. The man who expanded Russian civilization into Asia, the courageous explorer who opened new frontiers. But for the indigenous peoples of Siberia, Yermak is the symbol of the beginning of their destruction, the first invader in a wave of invaders that never stopped. Who's right? Probably both. Yermak was a product of his time, a violent man in a violent age. He didn't invent colonialism, didn't start Russian expansion. He was simply its instrument. But instruments have consequences. Yermak's expedition began a conquest that would last 300 years. That would subjugate dozens of native nations, that would transform Siberia from a mosaic of indigenous cultures into an extension of European Russia. 13 million square kilometers, 77% of modern Russia's territory. It all began with a bandit wearing steel armor, falling into a dark river. This was the story of Yermak Timofeyevich, Cossack, bandit, conqueror, legend, a story of redemption through violence, of ambition, of a fatal mistake that cost a life but created an empire. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Leave in the comments. Was Yermak a hero or a villain? Was his conquest progress or genocide? I want to know what you think. Next week, I'll tell the story of what happened after Yermak's death, how the Russians returned to Siberia, how they conquered the rest of the continent, and how millions of indigenous people were crushed under imperial advance. It's even more brutal than this one. Until then, some legends are born from death.